here. One second here. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me in person, on the web, and from the future via the recording. Today we're going to talk about our 2019 grant cycle, which is now officially open. We'll talk a little bit about some of the changes, some other things that are going on, and then teach folks that are new how to get into the system, and a refresher for all of you folks who haven't done it in over a year, because it's not necessarily the most intuitive system. Here's the agenda for today, but before we get into this, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director, Walter Clark, who will tell us a little bit about some of the more interesting legislative goings-on and how the sky is not falling. So, Walter Clark, please come up. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to the staff of Clean Water for putting together, as they always do, an excellent presentation that I think you'll find very valuable today. Many of you may know that last week there was a Senate Bill 821, that struck fear into the hearts of many of us in the conservation world. Basically, it was a bill that, if you read it, looked like several boards and commissions were going to sunset as of the end of June 2019. And one of those boards was the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, and another was PARTF. But what that piece of legislation really did, if you look at it very closely, it wasn't about abolishing those programs. It was about abolishing or changing the makeup of the boards and commissions. And many of you may remember, this is getting into some detail, but there was a court decision last August that found 6 boards and commissions unconstitutional because the majority of the appointments were made by the legislature, not the governor. That court ruling said that the majority had to be made by the governor because those boards and commissions were housed in the executive branch of government. So the legislature ultimately has to fix those sections of our enabling legislation, including the enabling legislation that deals with clean water. Excuse me. So really, Senate Bill 821 didn't do what a lot of people thought that it was going to do. But it did generate quite a bit of interest and I think, communication with the legislature. So the latest is that probably Senate Bill 821 will not advance at all. The legislature still will, in the long session, have to come back and amend that portion of the Clean Water Act that deals with the appointment of boards and commissions, as well as that, the board that deals with PARTF as well. So really, as of right now, there doesn't seem to be any great concern with Senate Bill 821 or any sunsetting of the Clean Water Program or of the PARTF program. So rest easy, take a deep breath, get your applications in for 2019, because as far as we know, we're in business. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Walter. Before we get started, let me roll back. So I've got you folks muted out there, and that's the way it'll be for most of the presentation. During the Q&A, we will unmute, as well as I'll be on the computer to the side reading the chat as it comes in. So if you've got any questions to address at the end of each section, we'll, like I said, we'll unmute, and I'll be looking at what you guys send me in the chat window. Again, we'll talk about an intro to our grants, just a real high-level refresher for folks that either haven't applied in a few years or this may be the first time. Talk a little bit about the timeline, and then we'll go into some of the changes that have happened as a result of some board action. And after that, go into more detail of how to get access to our application process through the grants management system. So let's talk a little bit about our grants. Eligibility, for those of you that haven't been a part, it's either a state agency, a local government unit, or a nonprofit that focuses on conservation, restoration, or preservation of our natural and cultural resources. If you're a private citizen, business, consultant construction firm. We're glad for you to know about our process, but you'll have to be working with one of the eligible applicants if you do partner or become part of one of our grants and successful projects. We work in a few major program areas. First is land acquisition, and this could be for riparian buffers, could be for areas that will be riparian greenways, or areas of natural or cultural significance. Another program area is restoration. This is generally stream restoration, which for those of you in that world, that's kind of typical Roskin natural channel design. But we also do floodplain restoration, buffer, and wetland restoration. So anything that kind of restores land and its ability to protect water quality. Our third program area is innovative stormwater, and these grants are designed to bring something new or different or innovative to the stormwater toolbox, as it were, so that our partners in the future can have more cost-effective and effective ways to treat stormwater issues. And finally, we have planning grants, which are essentially to plan for future projects in our other three program areas. So the crux of our planning grants is that it hopefully will kind of sow the seeds for a future application, make the application stronger, more ready to go, and better direct our future grant funds. Grant amount is a big question. There is no stated minimum or maximum. We generally don't do very small grants because it's a kind of a long and onerous process, and for a very small grant, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for applicants. We don't have a stated maximum. However, as those of you who have applied in recent years know, that the trustees at the time of the board meeting in recent years have instituted a cap just to make the funds we have go further. There was some discussion of the trustees this year letting folks know what that cap might be at the time of application, but we were not able to do that this year. And the other piece of information they really don't have that they would want to have is how much do they have to award in any given year. And because of the way our grant cycle works, this grant cycle, the 2019 grant cycle, until the legislature comes in for the long session and leaves town in June or July or August, maybe September, we don't really know how much we have to award in the fall. So that's another critical piece of information. But to give you I guess a benchmark, this year our maximum for application projects was $1.2 million, and for restoration projects was $425,000. For acquisition, that's been about the same for the last couple of years. For restoration, it has actually come down a little bit from $450,000. What I would advise you to do is put in your funding for the project you need to fund at the cost that it is to actually fund that project. And if we have sufficient funds, the board may not do a cap in that year, but kind of have in your back pocket that there may be a need to revise that to something that is a project that can fit within the cap. Matching funds. We have no minimum in our system. However, the score in our ranking system, matching funds account for 20% of that. So if you have zero matching funds, you're giving up quite a lot of points that are used to prioritize the order of applications. So there's no stated minimum, but it's a good idea to have some so that you don't leave those points on the table. Also, our trustees traditionally have liked to see leverage funds and skin in the game. So they like to know that the applicant is contributing to the effort so that they're vested in the success of the project. Timeline, the applications and the guidance are available online as we speak. January 18th is going to be the last day to start the application project from scratch and reasonably expect to meet that application deadline. And the reason for that is that first you have to get into the grants management system, which requires a little bit of back and forth, and some part of that administrative process, though it usually works pretty quickly, is out of our control. So we have no control over that. If you're already in the grants management system, January 18th is not your deadline. But if you're here, never done a grant with us before, not in the grants management system, you should start that process as soon as possible. Application deadline, midnight on February 4th. That's a Monday. We're giving you the weekend to stress and fuss and fret over it. But the system shuts down at midnight on February 4th. So give us all the detail, all the materials that we need as you want our board to see them. We spend a little bit of time in past years, or rather maybe an inordinate amount of time, chasing incomplete application information. So what the board will see, if you're one of those folks, is your corrections and emails and all the things that will do nothing more than make you look less organized in the presence of the folks who are making decisions about whether or not to let you handle the grant contract and a lot of taxpayers' funds. So February 4th, have it buttoned up neatly when you submit it, please. March through June is application review. Our program managers will be reviewing the applications here in the office, and our field reps, Damon Hearn and Justin Mercer, will be scheduling meetings with you all to come and see the project on the ground, go over the application, and every one of our projects gets an in-person review with our field staff. So if you submit an application, I look forward to hearing from them. And September 11th and 12th is when we are currently scheduled to have our board review and awards. Put a little asterisk there because in the last 4 years, we've missed that deadline twice for various reasons. Sometimes the legislature can't negotiate a budget before our meeting, or this year, as Walter's already said, we had an interesting judicial intervention. But we always make it a priority to get together and get those funds out the door as soon as we can. So with all that said, I'm going to bring up Nancy Guthrie to talk a little bit about the changes to the rating system for 2019.
All right, thank you. The rating system for the acquisition program was adjusted for this year, and I think probably many of you have already heard me go over these changes on phone calls or have talked to people individually, so I'm not going to give you a lot of details on this. The rating system is on our web page. It also is at the back of the guidelines for 2019. And the guidelines for this year, I will take a moment to say, those have been rewritten to really include more guidance on conservation agreements that are acceptable, activities that we expect to see in match areas versus clean water funded areas. I will say again, though, that those are guidelines. If you have complicated projects, lots of landowner rights reserved, please do talk to Damon and Justin early in the process about that so we can get all of that straightened out for you. But I think the guidelines would really be worth everyone taking a look at this year. So for the rating system, one of the overall changes is that the resource significance of the points, or 60 out of 100 points, this was 55 in the past, but this just emphasizes the importance of the resources out there that are being protected. And those 5 additional points came from reducing the points in the readiness category. But we'll talk more about that category in a few minutes. So I'm going to, again, just hit some highlights within the resource categories for you to be aware of. The stream classification, the property has to border the stream with that classification or be within 1 mile upstream. This is a change. In the past, it's been 5 miles upstream, but that is a large distance. A lot can happen on the landscape in 5 miles. So we have narrowed that to be within 1 mile upstream of your highest rating classification. Other changes on the riparian buffers, it gives greater emphasis on water supply classification. The inland primary nurseries identified by Wildlife Resources Commission are now included. And then instead of at the end having a lot of different categories, any other stream that you have on there that is not listed in one of the categories above, you're going to get 15 points for just simply having a stream on your property. The network points, previously this was stated that it needed to be connected to other managed lands, but for each area you'll see this needs to be connected to the similar resource. So for the riparian buffers, to get the network points, it needs to be connected with other protected properties protected for riparian buffers. So we did add the condition that if a property has many miles of streams, that can also receive points, even though it is not adjacent to an existing conservation property. In the riparian greenways, we had good conversations with our trustees. They decided that they wanted to focus on those riparian vegetated point-to-point urban sections of greenways. Point-to-point means a school to a park or a neighborhood to a park, you know, more of a destination. So sections of our larger regional, state, and interstate trails, such as the ATE, portions or segments of that might qualify, but it has to overlap with an urban area that has its own greenway that has incorporated these larger trails. In the natural heritage, ecological diversity sections, not a lot of changes here, though there's a shift in points to give greater emphasis on natural communities over individual occurrences. The networks, again, need to be connecting to another parcel that's protected for ecological diversity. And again, in case you are starting out in a new section of the state where there's not already existing conservation, there is consideration for the size of the tract to give you some adjacency or network points. So that's our major natural resources. The other area that we protect are the military buffers. Realize this only applies to a few of you, but the categories are going to more line up, and our points are going to more line up with priorities from the military installations, as opposed to right now, previously they were based more on just proximity to a base. But I do talk with personnel from each of the installations. I send them our applications, they rate them, give us their priority for the tracks, and that has proven to be a really good way to make sure that we are funding their highest priorities in this category. The readiness section, this is where you all may want to sit up straight and listen to this, because this does affect all of you, and it is a pretty big, this is probably, to me, the largest change you need to pay attention to. And that is, to be considered for funding, a letter of intent to sell or a purchase contract is required. So in the past, you got points if you had a letter of intent to sell, and you got a few more points if you had a purchase contract. This year, after the June 14th deadline, which that June 14th is the deadline that we will take updates on match status, take these letters of intent. To be funded or to be considered for funding, you have to have in a letter of intent to sell, a signed letter of intent, or purchase contract by that date. There was quite a lot of discussion with our committee on that, and they feel pretty strongly that having that level of readiness is important. The others, again, were already in the rating system on the funding status, and your the match, let's see, I have it, the match also did not change. I'm going to stop there and let Marissa talk about some adjustments in the stewardship monitoring.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, good morning. So in terms of stewardship, this really affects applications in which there will be a state health conservation easement at the end of the project. So if the conservation strategy is some other thing, that this will not apply. But when there is a state-held easement, we do require that the applicant estimate the amount of funds that need to be set aside to monitor the property in perpetuity, and it's held in our stewardship endowment. And this year, we made some very minor adjustments to how these are calculated. And I feel like a lot of them are more of a formalization of where things were headed in the past. So some of these clarifications you'll see are, we have set a default rate of $50 per hour for staff costs. I think we had seen a wide range previous, which may not have gotten at the real cost of staff time for monitoring these properties. And so we want to make sure that those funds are available for every monitoring organization who has this responsibility in perpetuity. And so we have set it at estimation purposes for $50 an hour for everyone. So you will see that as a default number in the application. Additionally, we've set caps on the hours that the monitor can spend on certain activities. And that includes 2 hours on pre-monitoring, which is the work that the person is doing, reviewing the baseline, reviewing former monitoring reports, checking in with the landowner, that sort of thing. And then capping it at 3 hours for post-site monitoring. So that's filling out the report, processing the photos, maybe a follow-up with the landowner. Those have been instituted in the past, but they are now formalized through the application. You cannot enter in more than 2 and 3 hours in those areas. Finally, just a clarification, the budget does include area for incidental expenses for boundary marking. That is not the initial boundary survey for the property. That is included in the acquisition application itself. This is a very small expense for annual signs, flagging tape, paint, that sort of thing. It should be a pretty small number, incidental expenses. And then finally, the budget does allow you to fill in other expenses, which need to be approved. But at this point in time, it will let you add in what the other expense you're asking for is. So we don't need to go back and forth too often on that. And all of these updates I shared with the monitors from the different organizations who have stewardship contracts with clean water. And so I called on the stewardship folks. If they're not involved in coming up with this estimate, I really encourage it, and also say that the land acquisition folks definitely reach out and work with your in-house expertise, because the amount of the estimated budget here is the amount that you'll have to monitor this property in perpetuity. So it's really important that we get it correctly. And I think when applicants do bring in their stewardship folks, they get a really good estimate for the amount of money needed. And I think the same goes too for when the applicant is maybe assigning the monitoring responsibility to another organization. It's that organization that has the responsibility to monitor who really needs to be developing the stewardship budget to make sure it meets their needs. So definitely check in with the monitoring organization, have them develop the budget, and our field reps may circle back and make sure that the monitoring organization is comfortable with that amount.
So with that, we'll take any questions for the acquisition program. Give me a second here, and I'll open up the mic and see if that doesn't turn into chaos. And check the chat as well. All right, so I'm looking at the chat. You guys should be free to talk. If you don't plan on talking, it might be great if you would mute your phone from your end. But does anyone have any questions for Nancy or Marissa about acquisition? One from Rusty Painter here in the room. What do you got, Rusty?
Network point for connection to other protected land. It implied in the presentation that the adjacent land must be protected for riparian buffers or in natural heritage space for the ecological integrity. What if the adjacent protected land is protected for recreation or some other use, but not specifically stated in whatever deed or restriction that it is for riparian land or.
Paraphrasing Russ's question before you answer. All right.
So the question is on the network connections. Does, for example, the riparian buffer have to connect to a property that has protection for the buffer? What if it's protected? What if it's adjacent to land that's for recreation? In each of those, it does need to connect to the light protection in order to get those points. We do not count riparian buffers being connected to the county park where there is nothing to prevent the crew from mowing down to the stream bank. If it's, just connecting a natural heritage site to DMS, Division of Mitigation Services, riparian buffer, but there is nothing protecting the upland, you do not get that credit for the ecological protection being connected to the next parcel. Does that answer it?
I was thinking specifically of say, a national park service unit like the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is inherently protected for both of those purposes, but there's no formal statement in there, including their mission or.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. The follow-up question to that, or clarification, was, well, what if it's next to the national park? Or probably also get the same question for the state park. I think if you can show that the managing entity is protecting for those resources, we can look at those individually. I think that, that's a fair question of some judgment there on what the adjacent property management intent and what would have to happen to remove that protection would be. And if so we can consider those.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna open back up the phone. Any questions from out there via the phone? All right, I'm going to mute that again. Don't see anything in the chat window. Thank you, Nancy. Oh.
Well, I am going to add one thing on the letter of intent, since that is new this year. We do not have a template that we are going to require. We want you to be able to use whatever document you typically have been using, or there may be requirements from other funding organizations to have certain words or information in those. We will be accepting those and looking at them. If we feel there needs to be some guidelines or clarification on those, we'll get back to people. But for this year, it's use what you are used to using. You do not have to have a final purchase agreement in that, because we realize that you still have to go through the step of state property office approving the appraisal before we can set that. And we'll be glad to talk to people about individual situations if you have questions.
Thank you, Nancy. So now we'll move on to the restoration section. So I'll bring up Steve Bevington, the Restoration Program Manager, to talk about restoration, innovative stormwater, and planning. Make sure this thing is moving with me.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning. I'm Steve Bevington with the Restoration Program, which does involve restoration projects themselves, innovative stormwater, and planning, as Will mentioned earlier. I'll go through about 6 areas of changes for 2019 applications. The first section is very similar. I'll go through it quickly to what Nancy just presented with the resource score. We're now trying to mirror as closely as possible between the 2 programs, resource scores and applications. So we'll see some very similar changes to what Nancy discussed in that area. Also going to talk about one small but key thing to allow people to take advantage of projects that may prevent future damage. So instead of having to identify a stream that's in a lot of trouble already, one that's under imminent threat, and I'll discuss that briefly in a moment. The project costs have a slight modification to the table I'll show you, as well as modifications to how projects can demonstrate sort of ecological uplift. And I'll talk about, again, very briefly, stewardship funds, as Melissa was talking about, being available now in some cases for some stream restoration projects, similar to the mini grant program, as you may be familiar with that. And the last area I'll talk about, again, very quickly, is some changes just for the individual stormwater applications to allow accredited universities to take advantage of true labor costs. It gets wrapped up with tuition for students who are involved in projects in some cases. All the changes I'm going to talk about are detailed in our guidance documents. So those are useful and hopefully useful and available online. And I'm sure this presentation will be available online as well. So the first thing again is, and Nancy did this, but I think it's worth mentioning again, resource score values in some cases were extended in previous years to as much as 5 miles downstream of a project, or upstream in some cases, if there was related, and we really realized there was a lack of impact on some projects from areas that are being considered as sort of relevant to the water quality issues. And we really think 1 mile is a much more realistic number. And with the restoration program, much as with the acquisition program, stream restoration score values will really only be available to projects pretty close to a listing of a state resource. That's described, again, where you can find those values in our guidance documents. Often maybe the 303D listed streams described by the state, or in stream classifications, again, available on websites and bookmarked through our guidance documents. Nancy mentioned this very briefly as well. There's a little more emphasis on water supply protection in the current application, so the water supply watersheds getting a slightly higher score than past years. A little more emphasis on primary nursery areas, and an important distinction is we're actually including state described, I think it's the Division of Wildlife Resources, inland primary nursery areas as well, that weren't explicitly mentioned before in previous application documents. Surface water susceptibility is a very broad description. It essentially covers so much of the state. The board has chosen to downgrade that slightly. It still achieves resource value points, but not quite as much as in past years. And I think it's worth pointing out, too, that we are relying quite firmly on the state definition of what an impaired water is. So we've removed a description we had in previous application documents that said other impaired waters, not on the 303D list, could get some of these points for resource value. And we really thought there was such a gray area, it was a disservice not only to the value we were trying to spend to achieve water quality with state monies, but also applicants were unsure of what score they would get. So the official referee really, again, is going to be the Division of Environmental Quality documents describing the 303D list. So be sure to check that. The second area I just want to talk about, and I sort of already highlighted this, but here's the actual words that are going into the rating system. And it's just the underlying section there of really to get impact effectiveness of the project, you obviously need to affect a stream if it's degraded lands that will be improved. And we had some nice examples of large head cuts where the stream was fine on a given property, but right below it was a sort of an eroding gully headed towards it. And it was difficult for us to give a fair score. And our concern, the board's concern, of course, is that it's sometimes much cheaper to fix things before they get really bad. So just a little clarity on that, to really looking for opportunities where we are really facing a problem, but hopefully we can shortcut it and fix it in the quick system, and maybe save some money as well and save some resources. The table to the right here is really describing the current costs. You can get up to 10 points for your effectiveness score out of 100 on the value you get per linear foot of a project if it's a stream restoration project. And really all this table is doing is truncating the very expensive projects, so the most expensive projects will receive a little bit less. We see very few of these applications put in $1,000 linear foot, is a pretty expensive project, and we don't see them much anyway, but we're essentially trimming it down into the norm of what we see funded through our program and other state programs in the state. Restoration projects can really need to show effectiveness too in terms of some kind of water quality benefit. And in the past, the first option, and really the only option available to stream restoration projects, was to demonstrate sediment reduction in stream. And people could do this either by modeling or monitoring what was happening now and predicting what might be in the future. And this table has been trimmed again to sort of recognize that distribute the points differently. First of all, there's 2 more points. I should mention, I don't have a slide for this, but there were in past applications 2 points available out of 100 for innovative projects. That's been removed from the stream restoration side. It's sort of, the technology has been around it's still evolving, but it's been around for about 20 years, and the board felt it's probably better to distribute those straight into effectiveness rather than saying, come up with a brand new idea. So there's 10 points available for that, and so it's sort of redistributing those points for sediment effectiveness. To get your maximum, you can get, if you get a huge sediment load to your proposed project, you get the maximum number of points. Probably the most important change in the whole application, as I see it for stream restoration, is option 2 now, which did not exist before, which is if you have a project, for example, there's some people who have been looking at potentially removing impediments to natural fish passage or other activities that don't actually affect sediment in the stream, but have very important water quality benefits. We have an option now for people to be able to document through their rating system to get the same up to 10 points for that. So option 2 is essentially using some kind of standard state model. I listed 3 here that I know we will consider. That you'd be able to document current conditions and predict future conditions and show that your project would likely, if all goes well, achieve this ecological uplift. And it is a bit more cumbersome. Staff has actually done a little of this work in the past, and we're doing the field work this month to make sure we're confident to be able to complete it in less than a day, just the field work and then doing some modeling. It is a burden, but it's only an option. And the other thing is, if restoration projects become mature and go to construction, one of these models is almost always required as part of the permitting process anyway. So there is an opportunity to recoup those efforts and costs at a later date. But I understand it's an option that not everybody will take advantage of. So we'll try and make ourselves available as staff, probably primarily me. The field reps get mighty busy once applications roll in, but they'll have some familiarity with these systems as well and be able to provide advice. I don't think it would really go to the level of helping out with these predictions. May involve a consultant or someone else who's familiar with it to be involved in the project. But again, it's an option I hope some people can take advantage of. Very quickly, stewardship endowment funds. It's sort of recognized that we have permanent conservation easements on all these stream restoration projects. In fact, that's a requirement for almost every one. Some special cases in areas that are already protected as state parks or large municipal reserves. But there is a recognition that long-term stewardship is really a key to the success of these projects. So the board has allowed us to consider a project, sort of small amounts of funding. It would follow the same model as the mini grant program. Mini grant program is not the right word, or maybe it is well, but Clean Water Management Trust Fund does have a stewardship program currently in place, and you can follow that same model for some stream restoration projects. And I've underlined the key words here. Really, first of all, the easements you're talking about have to absolutely meet or exceed our minimum standards. So anything that has any kind of incursion on it or is a little narrower than usual would not be eligible for this. It would have to be managed through a certified land trust organization. So and those funds would actually have to be placed directly into a stewardship endowment. So I think that's important to have that clarity that really it's taking advantage of an existing financial infrastructure that's there, a stewardship fund that, and people are familiar with this process and do it for a living, to be able to work with partners on a restoration project and allow a portion of Clean Water Management Trust funds to help with this long-term stewardship. And it would also need to be matched. It wouldn't be something we would pay flat out, but we would would have a match, and that's contained in the budget materials that are part of the application as well. One other important change, but probably applies to only very few applications, and it's only for the Innovative Stormwater Program. I'm going to go ahead and highlight, this is an awful long paragraph, and I apologize about this, but essentially, some of our innovative stormwater projects, really what we're asking for is not necessarily short-term water quality benefits. What we're asking for is a discovery, either that something works or it doesn't work, that can be shared with others. In that case, it's sort of obvious that universities are a major source of this sort of activity and be able to document with a study design how well these things work. It isn't the only way to do it. But when students get involved in it, if it's a major part of their work, it's been a hardship on some applicants in the past to work with us because we did not allow tuition payments to be considered. We obviously don't pay for students to go to class, but if they are doing this kind of coursework, to be prepared to manage the project, I've underlined the kind of key things. It's in our first rollout of this, and the board has approved this recently, it really just be for graduate students at a accredited North Carolina educational institution, and they have to be the principal employee responsible for the quality of the project. So it's really this one person who's directly involved, and there's some limits on how much it could be per year, but just recognizing that those labor costs from a student primarily do come from their activities as students, and their compensation is going to be able to be on campus and yet participate in a study like this. So if that happens to apply to you, these materials are available in our guidelines, and we'd be happy to answer any questions about that. So with that, I know I went through that very quickly. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this. We'll run the show on that.
All right, well, let's start with folks in the room. One question from Eric in the back there.
So, we discussed ecological uplift when you're doing a preservation project.
Oh, so this would apply just for the restoration side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So there are areas that streams are in excellent condition, and we just enhance the buffers, for example. So there could be an ecological showing. I think you could rely also on the points available for that imminent destruction kind of concept. So those are the two angles that would come in. But
so would you be looking for an NC-STAM rating as part of an application showing that, you know, it's got some significant ecological attributes right now?
Well, the trouble is, to get the effectiveness, you're going to have to document a difference between some current or an imminent condition and a future condition after your project. So your model, if it's going to get a lot of points, it could be successful as the out-and-out preservation opportunity. I think generally those are going to lean more for a lot of projects that we're doing ecological benefits aside from sediment reduction. So I think in the same way people had to look at potential stream restoration projects and say, I'm sort of in an enhancement business here. We have a lot of applicants who do have pretty good streams. They want to make it even better. And that is a limit, because if you're already pretty good and you're making it great, you only get half the points. And we recognize that's a frustration. In some ways, though, that's the nature of restoration. If you take something really terrible and make it great, there's a little more benefit to water quality state. We hope also, and I do mention the two areas you can get those points. You could use the model or the sediment, whichever gives you more likelihood of getting good points. I think I'd go that direction. Look at not just your future condition, but whatever imminent damage might happen if nothing takes place. You could take it down from a little bit if you could prove that it's going to be worse in 2 years, because the banks have been clear cut, for example. It hasn't eroded yet, but sure it happens, something like that. And then we do recognize that these enhancement projects aren't going to score as much. They just aren't going to score a full 10 in the effectiveness, but perhaps their costs are lower. And that table I went through very quickly that you can look up, that might be where you can get, on average, way ahead of the game compared to some of these more expensive, labor-intensive and earth-moving equipment kind of costs.
Any other questions from within the room? Don't run off yet, Steve.
Larry Bragg, Natural Land Alliance. When you were detailing the student assistance, some of these monitoring, projects will last longer than the student lasts in the school.
Sure.
So is there a provision to exchange one student for the next as you go through multi-year measurements?
Steve, if you don't mind repeating just the.
Okay, so the question was about tuition payments to innovative stormwater projects where the one primary student may leave the institution. Sure, that could easily happen. I think Terry would have to worry about the details of that, but we would accept that as labor costs. But there are, maybe I go back to that slide.
Yeah.
There are a few limitations. I can't remember if we said it was for 2 years or not. So it's only maximum of $15,000 per year, and it's sort of the percent of total labor costs. But they certainly could transfer between students. Right now, we are just running it as a graduate student idea because A, we wanted to see how well it worked, and then B, we really did want this person to be running the activity. So students who are just doing monitoring, they're sort of back in the same boat of they could have it as a summer job, and it would just be a job, but tuition would not be available for a student who isn't really the principal investigator on the project.
All right, any more questions in the room before I go to chat from folks out there? All right, Steve, the first question is, any changes to the guidelines on what is considered innovative?
So I'll take this 2 ways quickly. In student restoration, I mentioned the 2 points used to be in there for innovative, that's gone. So a big yes to that. But you may be referring to innovative stormwater projects. And the answer is in the guidelines, we have not changed those. What we've tried to do is really just 2 things. One is we've worked with the Department of Environmental Quality to identify projects that they think will lead to valuable information to be shared among partners in the state. So on the state stormwater manual list that the DEQ manages, they have a list of research areas. And those are ones we still would consider valuable targets, not exclusively, there'd be other things in there. That list did not change from last year. Potentially that's something to keep an eye on. If there's new, something that's been studied so much now they know, they'll remove it from the list. If there's something they're curious about, they may add it to the list. But no, we don't have an out-and-out definition of innovative. We're trying to push the idea quite a bit that innovation really needs to be, most importantly, documented whether it works or not. So if you can make an idea that's sort of fresh, I think there's some opportunity to convince the board it's innovative. We haven't been able to narrow that down into a definable way. It's just a very open-ended word, obviously. But the real area we are hoping to push people, and we've tried to do this in the guidance a little bit, is to say you've got to be able to contain it in an experiment or a study so that when you're done, not only can you tell it worked where you are, but it would work either regionally or throughout North Carolina. So I think that's my early estimate on these kind of projects would be, without seeing any applications yet, the ones that really can show a good study design, researchers who are involved in this kind of thing, and they know it's going to work and can document it, those are the projects likely to be successful compared to ones that are less so.
All right, another question from the chat window. How do you see the changes in restoration guidelines affecting coastal, example given, marsh edge restoration projects?
Right, so I don't know exactly. I mean, the guidance and the scoring ranking systems do change a little bit from year to year, so the proof will be in the pudding a little bit on that. I think there are some opportunities from the wetland, the ecological uplift and shoreline protection projects, perhaps with some people have considered in the past, for example, living shorelines that break wave action to protect the shore. Well, that doesn't really save much sediment. Sometimes it can, but generally it's preserving other things besides sediment. So I think the biggest changes, again, are in that ecological uplift modeling exercise to sort of say, well, the marsh is there, but in 10 years it might be gone. If nothing's done, our project will keep that marsh. And so you could show the difference between those 2 ecological conditions with a model. So I know that's kind of a vague answer, but that's how to answer this one today.
All right. And that looks like everything we've got in the chat window. So now I'm going to unmute the phone and let folks that are out there on the phone speak up. So any questions from the audience out on the phones?
apply?
Doesn't appear to be. All right, thank you, Steve.
All right. Pleasure. Thank you.
So now we're going to bring up Terry Murray to tell you about the grants management system, how to get into it, how to access it, and finally, how to use it. And she'll close that with a little bit of a demo, kind of walking you through what it looks like. Without any further ado, Terry Murray.
Good morning. So this is the hands-on portion if you've got your computer going. So I'll go through this portion pretty fast because like Will said, we've been in it for 3 years. If it's new to you and you still want hands-on, call me afterwards or email me and I will work with you one-on-one to get you into the system so you don't have to feel pressure to get this today. So we went into this system to save time and make us more efficient, and I think it's actually proven itself in the 3 years. I hope so, at least. On our end, I think we usually turn payments around within 2 to 3 days, on average. Now, there's some that take longer than that, but that just depends. So it's really been very helpful for us. Let me see what else I need to tell you. The other good thing about it is we get alerted when you make entrances into the system. So if you do a change request or a claim or you submit a document, we get a notification. Or in this case, when you submit your application, we're going to know you've submitted it when you've done it. And it's everything that is done is tracked, so we know who did it, when they did it, including us. So it's not just you. And it's integrated finally with our North Carolina State accounting system. So it processes your payments fast, and hopefully most of you are already in there. But like they were saying earlier, if you're not, then work with me to get you into the system. So that's our grants management software. We're actually partnering with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. So they're the owners. So when you see emails from them, that's why they're our business partner. But to get into the system, if we have a list of who actually has access to our system online. So if you have a question about whether you're in or your organization is in, please go check that list online. If not, the first thing you need to do is get the information to us to get you entered in. And we have to get your organization in first before we can actually get you into the system as a user. So the first thing we're going to ask you for is a W-9 form. It needs to be filled out with your billing address information, not your street address. It's however your bills are received, or preferably how you're listed in the state accounting system. Because if not, it's going to take us much longer to get you in. And then it messes up your payments at the back end, hopefully when you get that grant. So anything we can do up front to prevent these issues, the better. So the two forms I'm going to ask you for are the W-9 form, which I'm going to show you right now. This is the new one. So if yours doesn't look like this, I can't accept it. It has to be this form. And if it's not on the website today, it will be later. Then we also ask for you to submit for an electronic payment form. Now, this is an option, although we strongly suggest it, because we process checks Monday night and Wednesday night. They're released on Tuesday and Thursday on normal, and you get an email, usually within 24 hours, alerting you that that payment has been processed and is on its way to your bank. So again, you're getting electronic notifications, and you get your payments a lot quicker than if you're waiting for it to come to you as a check in the postal system. No offense to the postal system, but this seems to be a much quicker way we have found. So those are the two forms I'm going to need to get your organization into the form, into the system, in the accounting system. That can usually take 2 to 3 days. It actually can take a couple of weeks, depending on what's happening here at the department, because I actually have to route through to a coworker here in the finance office. And unfortunately, that's not their primary job, and that could take time. So that's why we give you that January 18th deadline, because I can't
everybody stop checking your news, and your email and everything else, and we'll see if we get a little bit of our bandwidth back. And we will continue if this is a little out of our control, but we will have it recorded, and we'll let you come back in, and pick up on the recording. If there was anything else I can do, I would, but I think it's best to continue so we get a good recording, and, get everybody stops checking the news, maybe we'll get a little bit of bandwidth back. All right, sorry, please continue.
Okay, let's try again. So on the form, like I was saying before the bandwidth messed us up, the important thing to remember is your unique 8-digit number. It has to be 8 digits. It can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? It has to be something that you can remember, because if for whatever reason you're locked out of the system and you have to call DOT to get back in because I can't reset your password, they're going to ask you for that number or they're not letting you in. Now, we will have access to that number because I keep secure records of those, but it's better for you to have them in case I'm not around and you really need to get in the system, especially on weekends. I don't want to get phone calls on weekends, so hopefully you don't forget. So that's the important part on there. And it does say that if you don't log in every 30 days, you will expire and you will have to call them to get back into the system. All right. Now, signing in, it looks like the screen on the bottom left, it says DNCR grants. You're going to log into ebs.nc.gov. You have to use Internet Explorer. It will not work on anything else. If you have trouble with that, sometimes you can change the compatibility settings and it'll let you in, but otherwise, it's not going to work on anything else. If it's not working once you get into the system, that's the first thing to check. What browser are you using? And we have no control over that. It's a system issue. It's just the way that one's set up. Now, once you get into the system and log in, the screen looks like the second one. And it gives you the list of all the different functions that you can do as a grant applicant. All right. So these are the 4 that you're going to focus on right now. You're going to do the application forms, to create a new application, edit existing application, and view your application and attachments. When you click on the application forms, you're going to get this screen. This is how you actually get to the form that you need to complete for your 2019 application. There's links in the document that you see here, and it's separate. It tells you to save it to a different window. There's a note on here that says there's a glitch, that the pop-up window may not disappear when you go on to the next section. That, I think, has been resolved, but if you experience it, that's what it is. And you just have to refresh the other screen to get that off your screen. It's done sort of like a buffering thing. All right, so next, once you've got your application, you're only filling out inside GMS the actual budget. Although it says it's an application, it's actually your budget in the application. So you'll click on Create New Application, hit the search button. This is where it's not intuitive. Hit the search button. That'll pull up every one of the 2019 applications and only the 2019. Then you select which application you're going to be completing. And then the next screen is going to be the budget that you're going to actually be completing. And each budget is different. So you have to be careful that you've got the acquisition or the restoration or the innovative stormwater. And it tells you at the top which one you pulled out. We have some helpful hints. You'll see a little question mark. If you hover over that, it'll answer questions that you may have about that particular field. Anything with the red asterisk is required. It won't let you save. It'll let you save, but it won't let you submit the document until all the required fields are done. So I'm going to back somebody holler because I talk really fast. Then at the bottom, here's the other thing to be really careful about. You have to click on the box that says this information provided in the project budget form, Monday morning, and the attached signed grant application is true, accurate and complete to the best of my knowledge. Then you have to type in your name and the date. Now you can hit the checkbox, which will check to make sure that you've filled out all the required fields. The save button is what I really suggest you do while you're in this process. Just save it. You can always come back and enter and make adjustments to it. But the minute you hit submit, it gives you one more option, I think, to back out. But once you hit submit, you can't get back into that application. You have to contact us to have us return it to you. And we'll return it up until February 1st, I think. 4th. Oh, that's right. So up until 5 o'clock when we're here, we'll return it to you. But after that, it's submitted. So be careful that you hit that button, that you're really, truly ready to hit the button. Once you hit submit, you're going to get this next screen here in the middle that says, click here to upload your attachments. This is where you're going to want to put your application form itself. You're going to want to put all of the attachments that are required. And then once you add them, this is what it's going to look like. You pull them, you just use the browse and pull in each one. Now we've got very specific naming conventions that we really hope that you will use this year. It'll make our jobs easier, and it'll make it a lot more concise and visibly easier to tell if you're missing anything. So the naming conventions, this is if you're doing more than one at a time. You just keep going until you get to the end. And I'm popping through this pretty quick. All right, here's the naming conventions. They are on the guidance documents. So please, your project name underscore application, pretty obvious, right? Your project name underscore location map. We need these to be in PDF. Use the smallest size possible. And then the only one, you'll have the little note there that says you only upload the natural community inventory if it's been completed by somebody other than the Natural Heritage Program. That's for mostly the acquisition, I think, not so much for us restoration people. All right, so this is for everybody. This is standard. Now I've got this color coded, so I didn't have a spot to put the color coding explanation on it, but the ones in purple are for every single program. For the yellow, those are specifically acquisition required documents. For the blue, those are specifically for restoration. So that's the craziness behind the colors.
But again, these things are in your guidance documents,
Yeah.
so you don't need to try to frantically copy them down
Yeah.
right now on the screen. They're just there for demonstration.
Right. And yeah, and I was trying to concise it to one screen. So like you said, on your each application, it'll say you need these documents. So you won't see all of this entire list on each one. Right, that's next. Then once you've saved your application, you can go back in and edit it up until we've closed the window. So if you hit that save button, this is how you go back in to make the adjustments. And at that time, you're going to see everything that you've attached, assuming you've attached something, or if not. So please, before you start another one, which could possibly be a duplicate to what you've already submitted, please check to see that you have one. And the easiest way to do that is when you go in, and I'll show you when I go live, but when you go in, do search under edit applications and see what comes up. Because if you've named it with the correct project name, you're going to find it. We had a lot of duplications, and we can't delete duplications, and that's something we have to work through at the back end. So if we can help you at the beginning, please help us by not doing duplicates. I know sometimes it might not be possible, but anything you could do to reduce that would be very helpful. Then once you've submitted it, you can still view everything, and you don't even if it's not submitted, you can still view everything without making changes. So you can see, did I miss something? And if you need to add something, you can still add it up until we lock it. All right, and here's how to click open the form. So when it opens up, your form may be hidden. You will need to click up where it says application form. You see that drop down button at the top. When you open that, because the first one, it defaults to the summary where it says application details. If you go up to the button right above it, that's how you can actually see the actual form that you fill out. And normally it'll stay like that if you open it back up again. All right. So did I go too fast? Let's go live. Okay, where did we move it?
And while Terry's bringing that up, I'll just kind of reiterate for the folks that haven't done this, again, the thing you actually complete in the grants management system is really just the application budget. And the reason for that is because that feeds into the grant agreement later and into the final payment processing. The application itself, where you tell us about the project, the narrative, that's actually a separate downloadable, fillable PDF that you, once you get access to this material, show you where you pull it down, fill it out, share it around the office, and then you upload it later. So most of the work you can do offline in your own time between now and February 4th. It's only the budget itself, which is a critical part of this, that you do through the application.
Oh, that's the IW.
Yeah, check down here and see if it comes up. It might have gotten, or check out. There it is. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I have a little bit more things on here, so please ignore those. I'm skipping right into the DNCR grant section. Now, mine's going to give me a choice, so please ignore this. When you log in, yours will actually log you in to this screen here. So here's where we start. Now, this is where you get the applications, and here's your documents. And then it's where it says to click here. These links are where you actually get the application and or the guidance documents. We strongly suggest that once you open it up here, you save it onto your desktop somewhere that you want to work it from, and that way you don't have to come back on here.
Would you mind opening one, Terry, just so they can see what it does? Because Terry mentioned this, the restoration application.
I know, of course. Restoration. All right, here's an application form itself. This is the one with all the questions, not the money, just the questions. And you fill it out. Everything that's in blue is where you fill it out. Then we also have some that will have drop downs where you can choose whether nonprofit or government. If you have any questions, you call us and we will work you through.
And then just say one more thing about the way this pops it up, because it's Internet Explorer and it's within our grants management system. It doesn't give you your normal options where you would normally download a PDF. So Terry will show you the place in the top left corner. As soon as it pops up, I would just save it to my computer and work through your normal Adobe Acrobat rather than have it on this web form where it's going to kind of behave funky and not give you all the things you're used to. So I would, once it pulls up, I would immediately download and save it using a little picture of the diskette, and then work at it at your own desktop.
Yeah.
That way you won't miss anything. So,
Yep.
Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. And then on the phone number, I think we've resolved the bug that we have, but it's usually looking for your phone number like this with your area code in parentheses. Yep. So if you do it this way, you should not get an error message. And I think we've resolved the error message. We'll know in a minute. Yeah, we've resolved it. So it'll take it either way, however you put in your numbers. The coordinates, it'll tell you here that you've got to put it in decimals. These fields here, there's not a limit, but please don't write a book. But you write what you need to write to get your point across. These fill in here. These are just check boxes.
That's probably plenty to.
Yep. I'm going to get down to the bottom. And I'll show you. Yeah, and here's where it talks about the budget. So the budget, it tells you here that you actually submit this online in GMS. And then here's your attachments and what you would upload. Okay. So that's that. There's, I hope I didn't kill it. All right, how do I get it back?
Show them where to actually click the button to get the new application, if you don't mind, Terry. I'm sorry to, not you, gone and closed it.
Shoot. All right. All right. To create the application itself, you click right here, create new application. Then you submit. Now, if I had one already created, if I hit the search button, it would show it on the list. You're going to see that there's not any. Actually, no, that would only be in the edit. In this one, this is the new ones. I'll do a different one. We'll do innovative stormwater now. If you want to minimize that out of your way, you get more of the screen. Yours were default to use, so kind of ignore the screen. I can actually pretend to be you, so that's a backup if we have to, but I really don't want to do that. And it will default on the budget form with how you are listed in the system. So all of these forms will pre-populate, and then you're filling out again everything that's in the shaded blue. And here's your budget, and here's your tool. It tells you that you're matching funds. This tells you about legal cost, what we consider these costs to be. Well, this one is actually information. Your tables, if you needed a separate, another line, click add a row. And again, now see if I do check, it's going to tell me I've messed a whole lot of fields. And until I fix those, it's not going to let me go. So that's how you do a new application. Let me go back to home. And then you can easily get back to home. And to edit an existing one, you go here. Again, if you've got an open one, now this is going to pull up some of last year's because I still have access to everybody's. You'll see the list, and then you can actually see what status it's in. And see, here's one that's been submitted. Get that out of the way. For you, you want to see one that says in process, because as long as it says in process, you can actually make changes to that. But once it is this word submitted, you have to call us. And then, of course, you won't hopefully see any of these yet. You should see, now you will see, for those of you that have been in the system, you probably will still see your old applications, and they'll have different statuses depending on where they are. But you're just focusing in on the 2019. These are sortable fields. You can sort ascending, descending. You can choose a specific number. Now, to give you a really quick tutorial, the application ID will always start with a 1, then 4 or 5 digits, zeros, and then 4 digits. So if you can remember that number, you can also go back and search on just that number. Under the application ID, you can do contains and just put 6083. Crap, I just lost it. And hit search. And go straight to it. That's for those of you that might have a lot in there. Now, I'll get this out. Hit search again. And the descriptions, same thing, you can sort them. And you can sort it by status too. So if you only want to see the ones that are in process, just do that. So I don't know if a lot of people are using these functions yet, but yeah, you can do these. You can also store any saved searches that you have and come back to them and name them up here, whatever you find useful. That's it for the application.
And then that last one, as Terry said in the presentation, the view application and attachments is for you. Once you hit submit and you're wondering, is it all there? The applications I submitted really there? You can hit view to make yourself feel better that it's all there and every bit and piece is exactly as you submitted it. But those top 4 links are really all that you folks will use in the application process.
So Terry, there's a budget in this application form. Do we just copy that over from the budget we fill out in GMS?
There shouldn't be a budget in the application form. There might be an example budget in the guidance document.
Okay, I thought there was one in that form you just showed.
The form she just showed was the budget.
In the system.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's the form. The application form, remember, is like a 15-page fillable PDF.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's what the application looks like. We
Yeah.
specifically
Sorry
took
about
it out not to have it being confusing.
Okay.
So that you know it's only in GMS. And then what happens is once we think positively, when you get funded and you move on to the grant process, this budget will forward over to your grant contract, of course, with any modifications depending on what you receive.
So if you use and save it to your desktop, how do you get that back into the system?
The application,
Yeah.
that you attach when you do the budget. Does that make sense? Yeah, because the application is itself is actually a PDF. It's not embedded in the system. It's a separate document, which is why we ask you to name it a specific way and attach it.
You can upload it immediately after you submit your application or save your application for the first time, or you can upload it when you're going to edit application. There's a place to upload there.
Yeah. And to save it to your desktop, you just use the icon up here on the top left, and it'll save a copy, and then you tell it where you want to save it. And of course, name it something that you can find it, so you know where it is. Right, and then like you were saying, this is just to do the budget in the system. So I'll go back into the acquisition. This, I'll pretend to be these guys. All right, see, this one defaulted to the budget being open. A lot of times, it will not default to that. Right, why can I not get it to there? There we go.
I think it's the difference between being in create new and the edit
Yeah,
existing.
so let me see. I'll show you this just in case. We'll take these guys. That one's not working either. Oh, let me show you one thing you might want to know. Under view. Here we go. Here's what I'm looking for. So like he was saying, after, when you've done it and submitted it, this box here, sometimes it'll open up looking like this. And this is just a summary of what's been submitted. If you want to see the actual budget, if you click that open, it'll be here. And then one way, there's this little handy thing here that if you open it up, it will give you full view mode and it'll open it up. Now this one's already in that mode, but had that been smaller, then you can open it to the full width of your screen and make it a lot easier to, instead of having to go through the add button, the increase size button, you just open up that little page control there.
Well, I think we've kind of informally entered it, but let's take questions for Terry first from folks in the room, and then we'll open up the chat, and then we'll open up the phones finally. So, any more questions from folks here with us today about the grants management system? All right. Any folks out there in the chat window have any questions for Terry about GMS? Don't see, let me open this thing back up so I can get that window if you don't mind. Let's see here. No, I think we're good. There we go. And finally, I'm going to unmute you folks out there if anyone wants to ask a question over the phone. All right, you're muted again. Let me get back to our presentation. So that, there, one more second here. Oh, sorry. Get us back to where we need to be. All right. So for any questions about the application process, GMS specific, Terry is the expert on that, and her contact information is at the bottom of the screen. For questions about your project or the application itself, the questions on the application, your field reps are always your first stop. So that's Damon Hearn for you folks in the western half of the state. That's Justin Mercer for everybody in the eastern half of the state. The contact information is up right here, but if you go to our website under staff, this is the first thing that comes up. We put it first because we want you to always contact them first. They're really the first line and the ones that can be most helpful for you as you get ready for the application process. You're putting together your application, and of course, you'll have a lot of contact with them once you've submitted an application. For those of you, and that concludes the 2019 briefing. For those of you that are already managing a project in GMS, have some other, just want to know a little bit more about how to manage that. Terry's put together just a few simple slides for a little more helpful hints and tips for those of you that may have just gotten funded from our 2018 application. So with that, I'll give it back to Terry and let her go over it, be another 5 or 6 minutes to kind of helpful hints for those of you already in GMS and managing. So Terry, back to you.
Okay, this will be pretty simple. Just to give you a reminder, there's a status code in there about where your project is in the system. If it's at L1, that means I've approved it and sent it on. Submitted means you submitted in, specifically in an application. That means you've submitted it, it's in our hands waiting to go through the process to get to the board. When you're now awarded, if you're sending in your applications, not applications, your claims or change requests, L1 will be when it's been sent to me. L2 will be when it's been sent to the project manager, program manager, which would be Steve or Nancy or Marie in some cases. Then L3 is when it's actually been approved by them and it's in Walter's desk to be approved for claims. And then L4 is when finance. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and then L4 is when the finance office has actually done their portion and it's approved for payment. This is specifically for claims. And then it'll show the invoice has been paid. And it'll actually say it's been paid. So you should know all along the way who's got your claim. Now, the levels are almost identical for change requests. The change request will go through everything but the finance. And usually not to Walter. We don't worry him with the paperwork. So I will go back on here real quick. There's been a lot of questions, especially now that people are in the system and they've been in there for a while. What takes precedence, a change request or a claim? If you've got a claim in and it's a budget change that you want to make, you can't submit that. You have to clear out the claim, we have to pay it, or we have to return it before you can submit a budget change. Same thing, the change will always take precedence. So if we've got a change request in to change the budget, we can't accept a claim until the change request has been approved, gone through the system and approved. I showed you real quickly how to do the budget section so you can actually see it full screen. A lot of people are missing this helpful button. Some people aren't. On your claim, I wonder if I can still get in there. Okay, how can I get that to show?
Hit escape to get out of the presentation.
Please.
There you go.
So if you're looking at a claim, I'll show you this one. there's something that will be very helpful for you to take note of. We use it in two different ways. On the top here in this budget, I'm trying to blow it up so you can see it. Okay, see where it says project number here? Normally you would do it number 1, number 2, number 3. If you do that, kind of be careful that you're numbering it correctly. Whatever number you put in here appears on your claim form information that is sent back to your finance office. So if you wanted to refer back to a specific invoice or something like that, or some department number that's unique to this grant, like NC State uses it for their project number, this is where you put that, because that will show up on the documentation that's sent with your payment. So a lot of people are missing that opportunity. And then especially with the large organizations, your payments get lost, and then they call us wanting to know where it is. So you can help yourself if you fill that out. Then go back over here. Get out of the way. Just back.
Shift F5 will bring it back up on that slide.
No.
F5 will bring it back at the beginning. There you go.
Okay, so there's not much more really. Get back here. Yep, submitting documents. This only applies towards the restoration program. So I probably should have stayed in the other one. We take our documents in the system in GMS where the acquisition program does not. They're using a totally different system for many reasons. They have many more documents than we do. So I hate to do this, but we're going back.
You got to hit escape first. There you go.
All right. All right, so you're going to submit your documents right here. Now, we use this for everything, for your pre-disbursement documents. Now, yours won't do this. This, again, is because of me. You will actually default to your account and your contact name. You open up and select your document. And we've listed everything that we typically request either in a pre-disbursement document here. Again, this is only for restoration, innovative stormwater, and planning grants. The annual update, these pre-funding documents only apply to nonprofit organizations. And once you've submitted it once, all we're going to ask you for once a year is your annual update form, and then you would submit these again if there's changes to these documents. And just to give you all a heads up, if you're still on the phone, be looking for an email about that, because it's that time of year again where we're going to be asking you to update your records. If we don't get this, we have to take you off the funding list, and we can't pay you until these documents are submitted. So I'm warning you ahead of time. I'm not asking because I don't have anything to do. It's really important. We're required to take you off the list and block payments, and that means all payments from the state if these documents aren't received. So I don't want to put you on the suspended list if I can help it. Then these other ones, again, for us, these are the three, everything except the NC Grants annual audit, that is only for nonprofits. And you are supposed to be submitting an annual document, annual report to us once a year as part of your requirements to stay active and get paid. So again, we're going to be following up with this. This is the next thing we're going to be working on really hard to make sure everybody's in compliance. Then the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. This unpaid vendors, for those of you that don't pay your vendors in advance, our legislation actually says that we will pay you, but you're required to pay your vendor within 3 days, 3 banking days, receipt of our funds. And then we're going to want proof that you paid the vendor. And that's how you submit this form. And then the other one is just your standard quarterly progress report, which we do ask that you send us quarterly, preferably. If not, I'm hounding you again. So hopefully that is helpful. If you hit save, They don't go anywhere, they'll sit. You've got to hit submit for every single one of these documents. And once you hit submit, I get an email letting me know that I've got something in my queue. And I work my queue based on whether it's a payment or not, or a change request, and when it's received. So it's not a favorite person or anything like that. It's based on when it's received. And it's always my goal to try to get things off my desk within 2 days. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but primarily. So that's pretty much the basics. Now, we've got some information on the acquisition, on how to submit their documents. And this is just how to do it. And then this is for acquisition. Did you want to go through it real quickly?
I'll take care of it since I'm up here. This will be real simple. So, thank you, Terry. Just one last thing, since Terry was talking about how Restoration, Innovative Stormwater and Planning do their submit documents. This is not application. Put on your earmuffs if you're only concerned with application. This is after the fact when you have documents associated with your grant contract that you've been successful in. Acquisition goes outside of the system for, as Terry said, many reasons, mostly because acquisition has to share a lot of these documents, closing documents, pre-closing things with a lot of folks outside of, not internal but external. It goes to the state property office, goes to our council, and so we use an outside group to share these. So if you're on our website, from the home page, go to grants. It's kind of a big split here. If you want to apply for a grant, there's a big blue box. If you want to manage an existing grant, there's a big purple box. So if you're managing a grant, you want to find out where to do your acquisition, we're going to go to the big purple box. On the right-hand side, links to our programs where you go into acquisition. And then right here on the right-hand side is many of the forms, but you can go to this one called Form Site Portals, and this is the way that you do this. The same thing that Terry was talking about for Restoration, Innovative Stormwater, and Planning. For acquisition, they go here and it takes you to Form Site, which is another kind of external form software, but this allows us more portability with the acquisition program. So hopefully most of you are either in one camp or the other. There's very few that do acquisition and restoration. So if you're restoration, pay attention to only what Terry said. If you're acquisition, pay attention to only what I'm telling you right now. Anything else you'd like to say about that, Nancy?
If there are questions on submitting documents, talk to either me, this is Nancy, or Marie Smeckman, and we're happy to help you step through this.
All right. Well, that is it. End of the briefing. Thank you so much for attending and joining us. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us. I'll leave this up as we go. And have a great afternoon.